Okay, 5 minutes covering the world. That's a great task now.
I thought of 31 minutes because Nina in thought that we'll be talking 31 minutes exactly. You can 20.
Okay. But part of the story will be that all these borders, all these boxes won't fit anymore. You mentioned, and it's in the program, I'm coming from this institute in Italy. Just to say what it is about, I always have to look it up myself. It's political studies, economics, and social studies. So I'm kind of caught all the time in these different, or from these different angles. If I'm talking about, or if I'm talking with economists, they say, but you are not really economist, you are whatsoever. And I am indeed, I studied economics, but I studied sociology, philosophy, and other stuff. So this is the one thing. And another point where I'm coming from is actually from Hungary, Corvinus University World Economics, Institute for World Economics, in a country which is highly nationalist and dangerously nationalist at this stage. Says something. In Finland, coming from or bringing in another angle to what I will be talking about, I'm teaching especially social economics, économie sociale, the cooperative sector. And as you said, I'm coming currently from China, where I do, funnily enough, the most conservative economics than you can imagine, in what is called, or what is still a country that is ruled by a communist party. So I think all these borders, all these patterns are still very much in place. At the same time, I want to start with a quote by Friedrich Engels. To the metaphysician, things and their mental reflexes, ideas are isolated, are to be considered one after the other and apart from each other, are objects of investigation, fixed, rigid, given once for all. He thinks in absolutely irreconcilable antitheses. His communication is yeah, yeah, nay, nay, for whatsoever is more than these cometh of ever. For him, a thing either exists or does not exist. A thing cannot at the same time be itself or something else. Positive and negative absolutely exclude one another, cause and effect stand in a rigid antithesis one to the other. So I think this is, for me, somewhat telling. It's from the work on socialism, utopia, and science, where we have exactly this problem historically. We are at a moment where we probably, possibly, find a major shift in what is going on. We still have the old standards of the welfare state. We still have these standards and we need to defend them. At the same time, many of what exists is characterized by two things. On the one hand, it doesn't really exist anymore to the full extent. And at the same time, we criticized it very much. Karl Polányi, Hungarian economist and social scientist, let's say, is well known and recently kind of rediscovered as somebody talking about disembedding. Now you can take this disembedding thesis as something where we can see exactly this. The economy stands there and it stands against society, apparently, and we have this strict distinction. At the same time, you can say he is actually saying something else. He is talking about a new way of embedding. And I'll give another quote, and that's basically it then with the quotes, where he says, the market pattern, on the other hand, being related to a peculiar motive of its own, the motive of truck or barter, is capable of creating a specific institution, namely the market. Ultimately, That is why the control of the economic system by the market is of overwhelming consequence to the whole organization of society. It means no less than the running of society as an adjunct to the market. So it is not really a complete distinction and separation, the dissolution of society, but we can say as well it's a reinterpretation of society. Now, one of the problems with these shortish presentations is that it's only looking at one element. But I think it's what I'm going to talk about, and trying to be relatively optimistic, if you want, is just one snippet, but possibly, hopefully, something important being able to contribute to this discussion on precarity and the change of society, which I want to look at. The thesis at present, and I put it provocatively, is that all these security systems, social security systems, are extremely individualist. They are not really social security systems, but they are coming from a highly individualist point of view. This is what we always or frequently forget, and especially we forget this when we are talking and defending this welfare state, the social provisions we have. In this way, we can go further back in history, talking actually about the problem occurring already with what is usually called the change from towards enlightened societies. Now there we find actually this major shift that had been later then translated into the system, into the economic thinking of a market society of individuals competing, looking after what Bentham called happiness principle, everybody being happy on and for himself, and then something magically evolving from there. It was a liberation in some way at that time, because it was the liberation in terms of a new economic class being able to make business, to be economically active, to be actors in a new sense, which never ever existed before. Before we have had God, and before we have had princes and kings and emperors. They determined what we have been allowed to do. Interestingly, and this is then shifting a little bit to the legal side, we find this at a time when we find economically as well the development of enclosures. Private property being the decisive moment, and private property being something that actually only allowed individuals to be the active part of a system. Of course it was a system, but it was a system that was geared, or that was already based in this idea of what came later to be known by Max Weber as the Gehäuse der Hörigkeit, the iron cage. Now we usually refer to this Weberian approach, the iron cage, as something that he discussed very much in connection with bureaucracy. But this was only a very small part of what he was saying. He was talking about a new system of rationality, a new way of thinking, which later then was called instrumental reason. It was not rationality in a broad humanitarian humanist sense, but it was an instrumentalist approach, utilitarianism known from economics. Now, I think there is one point that is, or that requires special attention in the historical perspective of a medium term. Now, I'm not talking about short-term history, I'm not talking about the overall history of the world, but a medium perspective. And economically, it is exactly this point of enclosures. Enclosures, a new development in terms of law, in terms of economics, in terms of an understanding of what human beings are. I always or frequently think we should not underestimate the truth in what Margaret Thatcher actually said. Now, she said it in a different way, but she said there is no such thing as society. If we take this as an analytical statement, we can actually agree to some extent. This system of instrumental reason undermines systematically what we call or what we think about as society. It still exists. It exists in parallel to exactly this market system that had been emphasized by Polányi. Now, we should not think back in terms of romanticism and say the world was fine and everything was okay and well integrated into society and controlled by society. Far from being true. Nevertheless, I think we have to think about these relations and the changes we are facing now. In legal terms, it meant exactly this shift of thinking social security, thinking welfare as a matter of individual welfare, provided by some kind of state, provided by some kind of society, but it was not a genuinely legal issue of the social. And actually, I'm working with some lawyers together at an Institute for Social Law, and everybody of these lawyers in the strict sense says, yeah, we cannot think even the social. We always have to refer back, and this goes back to Monsieur and all this, we have to refer always to the individual to be able, allowing us then to construct the social. Now, what happened was, of course, the construction of the welfare state. Keynes, Beveridge coming to mind, because that's exactly this merger of economic thinking and social policy thinking, which did not actually, well, it had been not outspoken in the Bismarckian system. But what they have had in mind were the 5 great challenges, the 5 evils. Squalor, ignorance, want, idleness, and disease. And of course, these had been, these are, and these are increasingly the major challenges we face. And we should not forget that this kind of welfare state, which had been a welfare state for the individuals, had been hugely successful and really brought a progress in terms of what people could do. You referred to being able to do something. It's not just about getting something, but it was a system that allowed us to develop our own skills of doing something. And this is true even if we have to acknowledge, of course, the shortages, the exclusionary character. 2 major issues and telling issues, I think. The one is gender, the other is the ethnicity. It was systematically creating the insider and the outsider. And we see this here in Europe currently, the migration issue. The migration issue is a huge challenge indeed for the welfare state, because the welfare state is a national system. It is built on national citizenship, and has difficulties to cope with it. So the insider-outsider. And there was as well another dimension to the insider-outsider problematic. Bertolt Brecht was talking about it, the good person of Szechuan. This was in a way replicating within one individual the same insider-outsider, the good person against the bad person, the morally led person who wants to be good, who wants to support everybody, standing against himself, herself actually, and saying we need to be harsh, we need to be economically viable, And then we can actually finance the system of being good. This is part of, or it is reflected as well in Polányi, in terms of the market rationality as being dominant and still depending on the other side, namely on other support system as family, as kinship. And this was part of this exclusion of women especially, who always did what the market system excluded and externalized, to use the economic term for it. Now, coming to this point of trying to be optimist. And I'm well aware of the problem with it. I'm well aware of the real relationships, the real power relationships, and the hegemonic system that we have with this kind of capitalism, which is currently, in different respects, a global capitalist system, and still has these mechanisms of externalization, and still has these mechanisms of oppression, and has them increasingly in terms of building up a new system that is, I called it in one of my publications, tending towards new Princedoms. Re-establishment of a previous pre-capitalist system. Nevertheless, let's try to look not only at the grandfather, but look at the child, or the child that is emerging there, with apparently or possibly 5 fathers, because if you have this strong old patriarchal system, the Princedoms reborn, you need actually more than one father, you need a whole lot of parents. And let's talk about 5 fathers, 5 mothers altogether. Meaning there are certain developments objectively, we can see them, and we all complain about them, and they are dangerous, but at the same time, I think, and then I come to the political economy, there are potentials in this we should not underestimate, and we should try to make use of them in terms of developing political strategies, not only looking back and trying to re-establish the old system, which we have to defend nevertheless, but at the same time looking at what we have. What is it? Point 1, excess of material wealth. On the one hand, we have this excess of material wealth. If you look, I watched a couple of films where it's unbelievable what wealth we have. If you look, somebody collecting cars, collecting actually Lamborghinis. He has 40 of them. He never drives them. And it's not just Lamborghinis. It's only the special Lamborghini. So it is a huge excess of money we have. At the same time, we have a huge productivity where we don't know actually where shall we go with it. Part of the crisis was, of course, the financial crisis, but at the very core of it, it was a crisis of overproduction. Because money was, okay, it's a long process economically, you produce so much, you get more money out of it than you can use, and that you can accumulate in the industrial process of capital accumulation. So you go to the finance market, you build up a bubble economy there, it bursts, which is good for the economy, because then you can start again. The state finances, so the nation state is still working and gives the banks what they shouldn't get. Anyway, wealth. We are objectively looking at the perspective, or from the global perspective at it, we are objectively forced to solve or to tackle problems like poverty, like migration, like health, and. Okay, we have a choice. We don't have to do it. The alternative is basically violent solutions. And this is what we find currently as well. We have, you mentioned war as a possibility, it is on the agenda. The problems are there and we cannot simply externalize them and shift them from one country to another. They always come back, and they are coming back very fast, and they are coming not back as individual small groups, but they are coming back massively and on a large scale. Third point, over-accumulation of knowledge. We are talking about this knowledge society, and we have to be careful with it, because to a large extent it's just a skill society, it's instrumental reason. We know better and better how to use machines, and we allow these machines to take over by all these technical issues like PowerPoint, like engines in cars that we can control, that are self-propelling, self-driving. At the same time, we have this knowledge, and kind of everybody has this knowledge. We do not have this one group of uneducated people and a small group of really educated people. We have a broad spread knowledge, and people want to use it. And they have to use it, because otherwise we are, again, from another perspective, entering conflicts. I wrote about it, I'm very skeptical about it, but we have this problem or this issue of blasting of traditional government structures. Governance is problematic, and governance is used, is misused, is abused by the ruling classes. At the same time, they do it for a good reason. They do it for this reason exactly. People are more and more educated, and they don't allow people, other people, a small minority, to do what they want. So they establish some governance structures, allowing the stakeholders, as they are called, to take part, to participate in process of governance. It's a complex issue. They are not democratically legitimized. We have now these internet-based awards and change.org and whatsoever, one click and you solve the problems of the world, which is of course not true. But at the same time, there is developing a huge potential of new forms of government. New forms of government, I said. On the way here, I read in Le Monde, I think, an article about the relationship actually between these internet-based forms of organizations and the structures of government. So forcing basically the government to act. It's not there yet, but it is something that surely needs to be developed and thought about. The last point, fifth point, the achievement of productive forces that are in one way or another technically social. If you look at it, and we complain always about the individualist structure and the individualist push, we have our headphones or earphones and we listen to whatsoever, but technically we have at the same time a huge, commonly centrally controlled technical pool that links us all together. We can't do for a conference without being linked to this world. This is a technical push. We have data capacities. Big data is tomorrow a topic on this. We have data capacities that are on a new stage, and then I come back actually with this to the first point of productivity. We have these over capacities. The only question, which is not a small question, is we have to use them. Again, Polányi. The quote I mentioned in the beginning, I want to try to reword looking at what we are facing now. For once, the new means of production, big data, presumption, annexation of production and consumption by digitalized systems are left to a self-propelling accumulation of wealth in the hands of a minority based on individual motives, society and economy must be shaped as such in a manner that allows us to relink, to reintegrate the system. It's working against a takeover by algorithms. It's trying to look for the possibilities that are in it. What are the alternatives if we don't do it? And there are huge dangers with it. I don't know if anybody read Wells' The Time Machine. There is this one scene pretty much to the end where he actually discovers what is happening in this world of a paradise. People not working, people enjoying life, like those working at Google. If you know these stories, Google must be paradise. You don't really work. You do what you want, what you like, and you are getting paid for it. This is happening, and there I refer to Wells, where he sees at some stage those who usually are not seen anymore, they are literally working underground. And at some stage they are creeping up and he sees them. This is what we are facing now. This is a real danger that we move to the society of pushing people, pushing those who do the work out of sight, and at the same time we have the possibility to make proper use of the potentials we have. And this is, of course, then a political question, but be aware we have the economic potentials that are there and we only have to make use of it. Thank you.